Thanks for joining us for an episode of Everyday Theology, where we connect theological truths to everyday believers. We're ordinary pastors, and we communicate theology and the truth of scriptures to ordinary believers just like you. Today, I have with me Don Matchett, who is, I think I'm going to get this wrong probably, Director of Church Relations. Is that right?
Director of Development.
That was close.
Development,
close. Church Relations, yeah.
Yeah.
But Brother Don, it's good to have you.
Good to be here, Ben. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, we've known each other for quite a long time, and so this is good to catch up and good to have conversation. Today, what we're going to talk about is missions, why it exists, and sort of what our purpose is as a church, what our purpose is as individuals, and see if we can talk for about 30 minutes. So before we get going, give us just a little bit of background on you, where you grew up, how you got to your role at IM.
Okay, well, I was a pastor in Arkansas, and quite satisfied with my church and where I was at. And I got a letter in the mail one day from the state, and they had started a new position, mission director of the state of Arkansas. And well, I knew immediately when I read the letter that I was being drawn to that position. And, quite honestly, there was no reason. It was certainly lots of people in Arkansas that were more qualified and better suited for that position. But anyway, I went through the process and was hired, and I had a great career. I believe it was a great career for, it was 14 years I was in that position. And then Clint Morgan asked me to join the IM team. I believe it was April of 2017. And then I started, it was April of 2018. And then I started that October. So, and learned a lot, and hopefully I've contributed a lot. So I think things are going well.
Yeah. Well, that's that's where we met, was those 14 years at the state office, because my dad was executive director, and we got to hang out. We sang a little bit together.
We did.
And we sang 3 or 4 times together.
Yeah.
But well, that's a wonderful story of God's providence in your life and how He led you to where you're at now.
Yeah.
So let's go big picture for a second. In one concise paragraph, maybe word or blurb here, could you maybe just summarize what you believe the mission of God is in the world, as it pertains to His working in the world?
Yeah. It's almost like you have to start in reverse. The mission of God is to have more worshipers, so that because He's worthy of our worship. And so along that line, He has sent forth the method in order for that to happen. And that's through the gospel of Jesus Christ to be sent out throughout all the world through His people.
Yep. And that happens in a lot of different ways, right?
It does happen in a lot of different ways. Yeah.
It happens in many different elements of life and many different aspects of ministry, and in familial ways, and even individually. So specifically, let's talk about, we know that individuals are possibly, all of us are called to be on mission. All of us as believers who place our faith in Christ through repentance and belief are called to, for maybe better terms here, make worshipers. The Great Commission is to go and make disciples, and that's what we mean by making worshipers. God is a jealous God. He wants our worship. He desires our worship, and we must do that, give that worship to Him. And part of our worship is making more worshipers.
Right.
So as far as individuals is concerned, what might be some maybe key factors or key elements, maybe some kind of hints in your life that maybe God is calling you to do something like missions specifically?
Yeah, I think particularly to be a missionary is what you're talking about.
Yes.
Is that what we're talking about? So statistically, I think the average person knows by the time they're 13 whether they're going to be a missionary, whether they're called to be a missionary or not. And so I think there is a particular calling. Now we could get into this, the discussion and argument about what calling is and are you called to a place and all of that. We don't have time for
Oh,
that,
yeah.
do we?
Yeah. No, we
But
don't.
no, we don't. But I think one of the things that I have said to individuals is, if God has called you to missions, uh, you just can't ignore it. That seems to be. I was not called to be a missionary, so I was called to preach, and so I think there is some aspects about that that are synonymous in that when God calls you, it's always present. It's just always there. You're being always drawn to do what God is calling you to do. It never goes away. So I think that is an aspect of being called to missions. It's God created you for that particular job and that mission.
And it's almost two sides of the same coin. You've got your call to ministry as it pertains to pastoring churches. Well, it's almost as if missions is doing that interculturally or internationally.
Right.
Most of the time, hopefully all of the time, what we're doing is we're sending people to share the gospel in hopes of planting churches.
Yeah,
and ultimately, the missionaries are the ones who become the pastors of those churches.
Yeah.
And so that's a desire that comes from God. He places in our hearts, and we either respond in
Yeah.
acceptance.
Well, just one little fine tune there. Our goal is not to send pastors.
Right.
Our goal is to send planters, and then, we desperately want nationals to come in and take those positions, and we perpetuate. We go to different places and plant new churches and put new nationals in there. And, in essence, what we're trying to do is work ourselves out of the present job so that we can move on and start a new job, so to speak.
Yep.
But I think it'd be wise to talk about what it means to be a missionary, the call of the missionary, because I hear, I've heard several people say everybody is a missionary. And I would disagree with that. Now, we are all on mission, but the truest term of missionary, I really believe that there is a special calling to a mission field, wherever God may place you. But it sounds really ugly to say this, but if everybody is a missionary, it almost cheapens the term. So, and I am definitely open to be wrong on that. But here's the thing: if it's just a special calling, if I need a surgeon, I'm not going to go to just anybody, right? I'm not going to say, "Hey Ben, I need heart surgery. Can you take care of?" Yeah. So it just is. There is a special calling to that particular place, and so we are not. We are all on mission. We are all called to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ in every part of the earth, in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and uttermost part of the earth. That being our place to go. But if we're honest, there's just a few who are called and who are capable of going to the ends of the earth. It just takes a special person for that.
Well, I mean, your analogy with the whole doctor and surgery thing, you don't call uh, a foot doctor or a guy who does knee replacements to do your heart surgery either,
Right.
even though they're both doctors.
Yeah, that's true.
So you don't. I think you're right. It does kind of have the term kind of lessen its impact and its meaning if everybody's a missionary, then okay, well, why didn't everybody go?
Right.
And also, we have. I think the biggest thing is, I think it would be wise for Christians to understand that everybody ought to be an evangelist.
Yes, I think that's true.
We're
Yeah.
all called to make disciples, and
Right.
that's not necessarily. This might sound off, but that's not necessarily missions across the world. Now, they're
Right.
going to make disciples across the world, but not all of us are selling all we have and raising money to go to a third world country.
Right.
Because you can make disciples in your own family, you can do it in your community, or you can sense the calling of God to sell everything you have for His glory among the nations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think that's a good distinction. So let's look at this and what would it look like? I want to get just a short little excerpt here on what it would look like in a family. How do you how do you foster a love for the nations, maybe just in your own home?
It's funny you should ask that question, because even now we are wrangling with that idea, because even if you look at our mission, we are the sending agency of the denomination. So we're sending out adults, and and then we have short-term missions where we send out adults, we send out college students, we send out teenagers through E-Team. But I think there is a little bit of a gap. What are we doing with families? Because they need to be nurtured too. They need to be educated in missions and those sorts of things. So I would say the first step in a family circle is just like everything else. It's the father and the mother's responsibility to teach biblical doctrines and theology. So, and as missiology is a part of theology, it's one of the five elements of theology. Therefore, it should be the family's responsibility to teach about missions. So, yeah. And I think a lot of, and this is not a short excerpt, is it? It's turning to be a little bit longer, but yeah. But here's the thing. There was a study that came out not too long ago that basically pointed out that most people who go to church, if they can identify what the Great Commission is, they've heard of it, but they don't know what it means. So I think that proves to us that there's quite a lacking in the educational elements in the home, in the church, when it pertains to missions and other things too. That's just one thing. But so I think, first of all, education about what missions is, and even going beyond the five Great Commission verses. There's a thread of missions all the way through the Bible. And I think people, I hear people or pastors ask me, I've heard pastors say, I really want to preach on missions, but there's really just 5 verses in the Bible. So why, after I preach those 5 verses, what am I going to do after that? Well, I think that's a very small view of Scripture, because honestly, it really is. Just think about how connected each one of even if you take the popular stories in the Bible that we teach our kids, there is an element in all of those about how God wants to be known among the nations. And so that's the very basis of where missions is in the Bible.
Yeah, and I think it's a necessary goal to also, as families and as parents, to allow the Lord to take control of your children.
Yeah,
and that's hard, but it's very important and imperative that we as parents we dedicate them when they're kids, but we don't want them to go when they're older.
Right.
And
Well,
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say there's a middle element in there too that I think that is extremely important. Um, I am the director of development, so you probably know where this is going. But we should teach our kids to give to
Yeah,
mission. My family gives to missions because it's the thing to do. But also, I want my son and my daughter to
yes,
give to missions because we are senders, and so I think that is as important as the goers. It's a dichotomy of missions. You have senders and goers.
yeah, exactly, and that's the role those who aren't called play.
Right.
Apart from prayer and short-term missions, um, the main thing for us here is to give,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's an important facet. So, what about churches then? How how are churches to be involved in this? What can churches do um, to be the senders or to give or kind of flesh that out for us?
Yeah. I think uh, Danny Gasperson had one of the greatest statements that I think I've heard in a long time. Danny said that Zephyr Hills, where he was pastoring, he said when he started, he thought they were mission minded, and it turned out they really just didn't mind missions. And in the the term mission minded, I'll be honest, I struggle with that a bit because mission minded is we've got missions on our mind.
Yeah,
We're thinking about missions, but reality is um, that's who the church is. That's the very DNA of who the church is. It is the church exists for the mission of God. The mission doesn't exist for the church.
yeah,
And I think Christopher Wright's actually one. I said that, and I thought, wait a minute, that sounds familiar. I think Christopher Wright actually said that. So we are about the mission. So if we approach missions in that aspect and say it's about everything that we do, you know, then it has to permeate the church as a whole. It's in our teaching, it's in our preaching, it's in our prayers, it's in our giving, and even in our fellowship. Missions is a part of that. And I am working for IM, but there's many facets. I think as you stated earlier about what missions looks like, and some of that is local. So church really needs to be involved locally, be involved with their state, be involved with the national programs, and also internationally. Um, and there is a good reason to be a part of an agency too. So when a church does those things, a church doesn't have time to sort out the budgets for a mission. They don't have time to raise the money. They don't have time to make sure that the missionaries are qualified. They don't have time to make sure the missionaries, believe it or not, the missionaries are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing.
yeah,
So that's why when we get beyond ourselves, beyond the local missions and probably state, you can certainly be involved in state missions for sure. But when you get into the national and the international, that's why it's so important to be involved with a strong agency.
Well, the agency just adds, when you have the hub of hundreds, thousands of churches, you can do that much more. I mean, that's a
Right.
no-brainer.
Right.
So maybe just one more thing here. How would you direct a church? Say there's no missions giving, um, that uh, there's no mission mindedness. I know we just talked about that word,
That's okay.
but there's no
I still
cognizance.
use it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, good. Um, how would you direct a church to maybe move in that direction?
That's a good question. Um, because honestly, there's usually at this point, if there's a church that's not engaged in missions, there's some reason. It could be something that happened in the past. Could be just some idea of some theology. There's several reasons. So if I were talking to a pastor who wants to be a part of a mission, but their church is not involved, I think you have to go to the root of what the issue is and try to address that root of where the problem is. But beyond that, it's really just education. I keep saying that word education, but Ben, you wouldn't believe how many churches that I have been to and sitting at the back door, and people say, I didn't know we had international missions agency. Free Will Baptist churches. So it's about education, and it begins with the pastor. It has to begin with the pastor, and a pastor who's willing to see it all the way through. If you're in a church that's not giving to missions, again, there's probably some reason that they're not giving, and it's not going to be a cakewalk. You're going to have to wade through some missions theology, missiology, wade through even sometimes things like translations, and other things. So hit those things head on, keep teaching the scriptures and keep putting it in front of your people. And this sometimes is a very slow process, but if you're willing to do it, people will begin to follow. And then once you get a few, then more begin to follow. And then you start gaining momentum.
I've often heard older, wiser pastors say that the pulpit drives the church, and
that's true.
Basically, what you are, what you get excited about, your people will get excited about.
Exactly. That's so true.
But if you're not excited about something, yet you want your people to get excited about something, that doesn't work.
Yeah, you're right.
So and all of us ought to have a zeal and desire to see the nations,
right?
Hear the gospel and respond.
Right. Well, I think it's wise too. Again, if any pastor that's listening to this, you need to do this with love and care. But I think it's good to listen to all of those excuses, why we're not involved in the mission of God. And there's so many. One that I often hear is, I think we ought to do more here at home. You probably have heard that excuse. And to that, I say, absolutely. You absolutely should be doing more at home. In fact, I think the last study, there's something like 93% of Christians will never share the gospel with anybody in their lifetime. So that is absolutely the truth. But here's the thing. We have the resources here to do just that. I mean, we have the people, we have the money, we have all of the resources to reach out further and do more. But most of our resources, if we're true about this, most of our resources go right back into the local church. I think the average giving is 96% of the giving that's given to a church is given right back to the church. And then you have the other 4% that is given to various things. And like 1% actually goes to reaching the unreached. So it's a hard argument to overcome if you look at it that way. How much more can we do? Because our people in the U.S., people are just inundated with the gospel. How many churches are close to your place?
Oh, Lord. There's probably 15.
Yeah.
In a 10-mile radius.
Yeah.
Or more.
So that's a pretty hard argument to justify. If you've got 15 churches in one area, where I pastored, there were there's probably 5 churches in a in a 4-mile radius of where my church, and they were Free Will Baptists, not including the Assemblies and the First Baptist and all of that. There were 5 Free Will Baptist churches, and all of them at that time, well, at least 3 of them, including my church, ran 150 plus. So we just have churches everywhere.
Yeah, and there's no excuse.
Right.
Yeah, so we ought to be involved. That's really, there's no excuse for us to not at least do more than what we're doing. And
Yep.
and ultimately, this goes back to: are we involved in the mission of God? And,
Yes.
And do we really want to see the nations hear the gospel?
Right.
And if not, then don't do more. But if so, then let's do it. So I want to end with just some little quick hitters. Okay, this is going to be fun. I want just a couple things you can take a couple minutes to answer, just quick answers, whatever. Dream car or favorite car? Dream car, favorite car?
Car?
Yeah, dream car.
Okay. Well, I would have to say the new mid-engine Corvette.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to go old.
Well, I would have, but I got to drive a mid-engine Corvette the other day, and I'm just going to have to say it's pretty nice.
Okay. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I know you like guitars. If you had a dream guitar, what would you want?
Oh, okay. A new Paul Reed Smith McCarty 594.
All right. Do what?
I was just gonna. You asked a question, and then I thought I could really dive off in details, but you said short, so I better.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry.
I better keep it simple.
I almost asked you what your favorite banjo was, but.
Yeah, a broken one.
Yeah, the one in the trash can.
Yeah.
Okay, if you and your wife could go anywhere in the world, where would you want to go?
Oh, wow. You messed up when you said me and my wife. We're just on opposite ends of the spectrum.
She'd go back to Arkansas.
Yeah, that's where she'd go. She'd go back to Arkansas. Yeah. I'd love to go to Australia. And my degree is from South Africa. I'd love to go to South Africa. Yeah. So yeah, probably one of those two.
Okay. Let's do one more. Favorite book? It doesn't have to be biblical book. Favorite book you've read? Favorite book you're reading right now?
Oh, that's a good one. Okay, this is really strange. Osmeyer, Practical Theology. I just finished that book. Really good. I like four-line systematic theology, but I am glad there is an index because it's all over the place.
Yeah.
It is.
It's a lot. It's heavy.
I do read a lot of books that people probably would not want to, a lot of marketing books and a lot of messaging books. Storyline by Donald Miller. I've read that one 2 or 3 times. So lots of good books out there. Yeah.
Well, those are all good recommendations.
Oh, here's one too. This is a really good one. I just finished David Garrison's book on wins in the House of Islam. Man, it'll rock your world. It really just talks about how, we don't think that we can reach Islam, and God's reaching them anyway. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation. It's been so good to catch up. So, Brother Don, thanks for coming on and conversing with us for a little bit.
Awesome. I enjoyed it.
Well, dear listener, we hope that you've enjoyed this conversation and that this truth reaches you with God's fervent favor on you and for his glory.